So you may be wondering why I had Deacon Gary read that whole list of the 42 generations before Jesus. One, because I like to torture deacons. But two, because it's vastly important to know where Jesus comes from. One of the things I'm looking forward to about tomorrow on Christmas Day is to go hang out with my family. And my family is wonderful and far from perfect. We've all got our quirks, we've all got our problems, and we all do our best to come to family gatherings and save face and say, oh yeah, this is great and that's great. And yet, there are always some things going on in life that are just not that great. If you look at Jesus' genealogy like we just heard it, his family is far from perfect. There's a whole list of unlikely characters in his background. For instance, we've got Judah became the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar. If you know that story from the book of Genesis, that's not a great story, because Judah was wandering about in the city and he ran into Tamar, didn't realize it was Tamar. The problem with Tamar is Tamar was his son's wife. And his son died, and Tamar said, Judah, you need to give me a husband, give me one of your other sons. And he's like, yeah, I'll get to it. And when he runs across Tamar by a well, he doesn't recognize who she is and thinks she's a prostitute, and then pays her, and things happen. And it's from there that Perez and Zerah are born. There's other strange stories. Boaz became the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth. Ruth, if you know, is a Moabite from the land of Moab. That means she's a foreigner. And if you're a Jewish person, to marry a foreigner is kind of a strange thing. Here's another strange one. David became the father of Solomon, whose mother had been the wife of Uriah. If you know that story, my goodness. David took the wife of Uriah, Bathsheba, whenever he saw her bathing on the roof when he should have been out on campaign fighting against the powers that be. But instead he found her, took her for himself. She found out she was pregnant. Then he calls Uriah to try to get him to sleep with her so that can be covered up. But Uriah won't do it because he's supposed to be out fighting. And so what he does is he sends Uriah back to the battlefield and makes sure he's on the front lines to get killed. There's 42 generations, and there's a story for every one of them. And then finally we get down to Mary and Joseph, and that's kind of a hairy story too. Didn't you hear? Joseph found out she's with child, and it's not his. This is the human family that Jesus was born into. This is what he chose to be born into, because he is the God of the universe and yet has made himself so vulnerable by becoming a child, by becoming our food that we're going to get to receive here in the Eucharist in a moment. He wanted to be born into this mess. And so wherever you are this Christmas night, know that Christ wants to be in the most messy part of your heart and in the most contentious relationships in your family and in your office and wherever there's problems. This is why he came, because he knows there's problems, and he came to be our Savior.